Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Passionately Wrong podcast. I'm James, and I'm here with my co host, Randy. And today we're going to talk about something we have personal experience in, but which we know is going to be of interest to many of you, and that is moving countries. A lot of people now have the flexibility, like never before, to work at a job that allows them to live in a place of their choosing. And so, what this means is people have opened their opened their minds to the possibility of living in a country that might offer them other advantages. Maybe the climate is nicer. Maybe they have access to a beach. Maybe they can get close to a place that they have some historical ties to or their family. For lots of good and various reasons, people think, hey, it might be interesting for me to go work or live in a country different than the one that I'm in right now. So that's the basic topic. What is it like to think about moving to another country? How do you prepare for moving to another country? And living and working potentially in that country. And then lastly, what are some of the stuff that comes up and how do you make your time there a success? So that's the high level topic. And maybe I'll start with you, Randy, because you've, of course, moved many times, but you've also moved recently. And maybe take us through the thought process a little bit of how do you pick a place to move to? What are some of the factors that came into mind for you when you were trying to choose a new place? I think you have been in Romania, were thinking about moving to France and ended up somewhat, at least to me, short notice, deciding to move to Spain instead. So what were some of the thoughts that you went through?
I think the probably, especially since I think most of our listeners are American, is the biggest thing is the visa process. Will the country actually let you move there for as long as you want to move there? For Europe right now, Americans can come to Europe for 3 months at a time without a visa at all. They can just show up. Most other countries, including the United States, though the United States has a waiver for most Europeans, but where they just have to do something online and they can go to the United States for 3 months. But anyone can violate those and live out until they get to the border to get out of the country. No one will know that they've been there for 5 years or 10 years or whatever. But I think one of the biggest challenges for a lot of Americans is how do I live somewhere legally for 1, 2, 5, 10 years, the rest of my life? How do I get my kids into school? Things like that. And so there's some research that definitely needs to go into these processes. For me, because I'm retired military, it's actually a lot easier to get a visa. Most countries have a retirement visa of some sort. And as long as you're making a minimum of minimum wage times 2 for the country, they'll let you move there and they'll let you live there in a lot of cases. And so my military retirement allows me to do that pretty much anywhere in Europe. And I imagine most of the world. There's digital nomad visas, which are becoming more and more common across the world in a lot of places. I know Portugal just got one. I think Spain does. Romania, Croatia are just a few places. And those are usually 1-year visas, renewable 2 or 3 times. If you have a job where you're making your money in a different country, for instance, the United States, because you're working remote and you just apply for it, show that you're making the money and show that you have health insurance because you won't be on the social health insurance for the country. And there's a couple other requirements. And then you get your year visa and you can stay there and renew it a couple times and then you got to get out. So if you just want to travel the world and experience the culture for a year or 2 and then move on, there's tons of podcasts and books out there, digital nomads and their lifestyles of what they're doing and where they're living and where they're going and how much it costs and things like that are exciting now because the digital nomad visa is relatively new, lasts probably 5 years before they start popping up all over the place. And I think countries are realizing that, hey, I can get an influx of money from these digital nomads because they're making a lot of money in whatever country they came from. And they're able to put that money back in the economy, but not suck it out of us by going through our medical system and our retirement system and things like that. So I think visa is a big number one.
Yeah, it's a very practical and very important issue. And it's correct that you bring it up. I'm a little disappointed that you didn't start with something more romantic and emotionally appealing, which is, hey, imagine the wonderful quality of life. You're sitting on a plaza in Spain somewhere and you're having hot chocolate and churros. And that is the the image that you have, of course, about moving to a new country, how great it's going to be. You're going to have this cultural experience. And so we should spend some time on that and recognize that, of course, it is the choice of whether to even consider moving and living in another place is very tied up to a whole bunch of things. But I think the emotional process of what you think it's going to be like and how it's going to be is important for picking where you want to go in the first place, if you have a choice. And then secondly, to help contribute to your success factors. But of course, it is correct that, and we're trying to pass on valuable information to people, that you focus on the visa. And I would like to just summarize what I heard you say, and I think it's a really useful description you've given, Randy. You can travel to a place. Actually, I understand that the US is also, Europe is going to introduce a similar requirement for Americans in 2 years to require us to also fill out one of these online forms, this ESTA form. But in principle, you could travel to a place for 3 months and hang out there as a tourist. But if you want to live there or work there, the process is a bit different and you've got to apply for and get a proper visa. Interestingly, and so you mentioned you might have different options now than you had a short while ago. Rather than applying for a regular full work visa, maybe you can get one of these digital nomad visas, and they're trying to encourage people. Some countries will make it quite easy for you to get a visa and to become a resident. And it is because, as you hinted, they're interested in getting your tax dollars. And so just because Spain will easily give you a permanent visa, that doesn't mean it's necessarily a good idea for you unless you're aware of what strings are going to come attached with it. But okay, we assume you want to live in the country legally, and if you're going to work in that country legally. And so understanding the visa requirements is probably a very good place to start. What's next?
And then I think there is something to be said about the reality versus the dream. A lot of people want to live in Paris and hang out by the sign and see the Eiffel Tower every day, but you're not going to be able to find a large apartment unless you're used to living in a large city like New York or something. You're not going to find the apartment that's going to fit everything that you want as you could in the suburbs of Raleigh or something like that. And so I have friends that live in Paris and they're retired military and they're living in a 400 square foot apartment with them. And they're happy because they get to walk around Paris every day. And I've done that for 5 or 6 years, but that's not the lifestyle I wanted to live. I just moved to Spain. I found a nice house with a good sized house, 2,000 plus square feet, but it's 30 minutes outside of Sevilla, which is a pretty large city. I couldn't find anything like this inside Sevilla, I don't think. Also, sometimes moving to another country, you find it hard to get a house where you want because they prefer to rent to someone from the country because that person makes money in the country and therefore is more prone to the laws of if you don't pay your rent, then they can start garnishing your salary and things like that. There's a lot more control over those kind of people. So they may actually, I've had people in France, for instance, when I tried to move to France about 2 years ago, I had a hell of a time trying to find a place to live because people didn't want to admit, they're like, "You're American?" I was like, "Yes, I am." And they're like, "So I don't think you're going to meet my requirements." I was like, "Well, what are your requirements?" I just don't think you're going to meet them. Is one of your requirements not being an American? You're right. I don't meet that one, but anything else, we figure out. One guy I went the roundabout way and he said, "Do you own a horse?" I was like, "No, I don't own a horse. I only rent to people with horses." Okay, man. You just say you don't like Americans. But our current landlord, we actually applied for a couple of different places in Spain and we had trouble with the paperwork and things like that. And I think they just didn't want to rent to someone not from Spain, but our current landlord was very open armed and met us halfway and we're really happy right now, but it was hard. It took us 3 months to find a place and we were willing to go to anywhere in France, Spain or Portugal. And it was really hard to find the house, the size of the house that we wanted and to get the landlord to help us out.
So anyone who has gone through this or is thinking about doing it is going to face what you described, the difference between your dreams and reality. And it's good to have a vision. That's what keeps you motivated and moving forward. But we've talked in other episodes about how to enhance your career success by keeping an open mind. For sure, if you're going to make a successful country move, you got to be adaptable. I remember when we moved from Frankfurt to Switzerland, we never owned a house and we wanted to get somewhere. And we're like, we moved, we were talking to a realtor to help us. And we're like, we want to freestanding house with a big yard, but we were moving to Zurich. And he's like, they just laughed at us and said that A, that's not going to happen. B, you can't afford it. C, I'm going to show you dingy little apartments that are going to cost you 4 times as much as you think you can afford. And D, you're going to like it because that's all that's on offer. And E, you're a weird foreigner, just like you said. And I think I can find someone to rent to you, but you do need to get used to some ego adjustments in a way. Believe it or not, Randy, there are places where Americans are not only universally liked, and that's no fault of ours, right? It's nothing we did. It's just like the favorable impression is sometimes not correct. The bad impression is also not based on anything, but you will face people's prejudices, and they have an idea about you based on stuff that they've seen on TV or in the movies or read in the newspaper. And that was, we haven't talked about this yet, but that attitude actually continues. I can't tell you how many times I would be at lunch and people would say, "Oh, and let me tell you something else that Bill Clinton did, and I can't believe it. And how could you be saying it? It's not me. I didn't do it."
I would also add in, so we've been talking mostly about Western Europe. There's the rest of the world's out there too. I've rented houses in Romania, Eastern Europe, and it was so hard to find a place that I liked that met my requirements. I had to be a little bit more open-minded about what was actually available. But however, the money plays a bigger part there than your nationality. And so I was able to like, yeah, this is what I want. And I would like this done before I get in there. It's like, that's not included. It's like, I'll give you the money to do it, but I want it done before I enter up into the contract. Same thing in Colombia. I lived in Colombia for 4 years in 3 different apartments because that's always interesting. Hey, so we're renewing the lease. Oh no, you have to move out in a week. I'm giving my apartment to my daughter for a wedding gift. I was like, that would have been nice to know more than a week ago. And so it just weird things like that. But those, once again, they were more than happy to take my money. I'd say, I like this place. I want it. Of course, because they saw an American, they probably boosted the price by 50%, but the quality of life there was a little bit less expensive. So I could afford it. But yeah, so it depends on where you want to move. I'm sure the Far East has something similar in some of those other countries where the cost of living is a little bit less and things like that. And then when you go to countries like Dubai and stuff, it's probably, I'm sure they respect the dollar, but it probably costs a lot of money too.
So that is clearly many people's motivation for leaving the US at least, and also many European countries, is to go to a place that has a lower cost of living. And then you're right, absolutely. If you have even modest means, relatively speaking, for Western purposes, your dollars or euros go farther in that other country. And it really does make a difference. And you can make your life easier if you are willing to pay for certain things. And so that's a sensible thing to take into your calculus when you're trying to figure out where you're going to go, how much are you able to bring to the table, and what are you willing to spend it on.
I think the thing we have to, the other thing for picking the place to move, if you're going to think ahead of time about this, is the cost of living, treatment of Americans. Those are 2 big ones. The third one is included in the cost of living is taxes. Some of these Western European countries charge a lot more taxes than the United States. And you're going to be, if you live here for more than 6 months out of the year, you're going to pay your taxes first to the country you're living in. And then you're going to file taxes in the United States if you're American, and you're going to pay them the difference if there is any, which there usually isn't, from what I understand. I haven't done it yet. I'll be doing the first time next year. And then I have to pay, I think I'm paying $100 a month for health insurance in Spain. Eventually I'll be on the social system, and I don't know what that looks like, but I don't think it's too expensive. But my first year here, I have to pay into the social system or into my own personal health insurance. Even though I have health insurance through the military that'll pay for everything, they don't accept it. They want something commercial. And that's another thing you got to look at, is that how you're going to do all your health stuff, especially if you're retired and older and you're going to have some health problems, or you may be able to afford it, but will they have what you need? And if you have another health coverage in the United States, whether it's Medicare even, Medicare is not going to cover you in another country.
Yes. So cost of living includes, very importantly, taxes, health insurance. I've heard you can prepare for this and read up on it before you go and have it factor into your decision making. I also recommend getting, however, some local advice once you're there, just to make sure you're doing things correctly. depending on how complex your situation is, that's easier or harder for people. I've heard only good things about people's experience with the Spanish healthcare system, both in terms of cost and in terms of the services. So wish you good luck with that. So that gets to maybe the second part of what we want to talk about, Randy, which is how do you increase your chances of success once you are there? You've got these transition issues. I got to find a place to live. I got to get my basic banking and insurances set up. What other factors contribute to, in your view, helping make sure that you get off to the right start and don't sabotage yourself?
I think one of the other considerations is language. Obviously, if you don't speak any of the language, it's going to make it a little bit more difficult. And if they don't have a lot of English speakers in their country, it'll make it difficult. In Romania, I lived there for 4 years. Everyone spoke English, never had a problem. To my detriment, I never actually learned any words while I was there because I didn't have any friends outside of my wife's family, and they mostly spoke Hungarian, so that didn't help anybody. And then whenever I went to the store, or the movies were all in English, TV was in English with subtitles, and the people at the store spoke English, and it worked. It was really easy to live there. Most of the countries in that, I guess that's another problem for me because I like watching movies. Most of the countries in Europe, they dub their movies. Romania might be the last country that doesn't. So I think you'll end up probably watching, if you're going to watch movies, you probably watch them on Netflix. Not a big problem for most people. That's not why they came to Europe.
That's a missed opportunity. I remember in Holland, it was great because they showed them in the original version, but there were subtitles. So it gave you practice if you were reading the subtitle.
And that's why a lot of people, and my wife thinks a lot of people in Romania speak English, is because they show the programs in English and have them subtitles. So they're learning English better too. So it was really interesting. So I think people will find that it's cheaper than they think to ship their stuff, if they so choose, to Europe. The only caution I would say is some cars don't meet the requirements in Europe. They have a lot more stringent requirements on their cars in Europe than they do in the States. Also, most places, especially if you're going to go live in a city, are going to be smaller. And most of your electronics, if they're not dual, they're going to be on a different voltage. I don't know if everyone else has this thought process. They don't know about transformers and converters. So I lived in Iran, which is, I didn't understand we had these little boxes, these transformers, which would change your 110 to a 220. So you could actually plug it in the wall and it wouldn't blow up. And then and nowadays, a lot of your computers and phones are dual, and you can, as long as you got a converter for the type of plug, you can plug it into a European wall or an American. And I don't think that was true when we were younger. And I don't remember what was going on in Holland. I think they're a different thing than the United States. They're 220. And
Yes.
almost all of Europe is 220.
Yeah. You talk about the ease, or not, at least it not being expensive to ship stuff around, but I do remember shipping transformers around, and those are heavy, stupid things. And it's really nice that most electronics today don't require you they will run on 110 or 220, and you just have to, put the adapter on the plug. It is definitely
buyers. I would never ship those anymore because, first of all, they don't fit in these European country houses where you want them to fit. And because ours are usually huge. And second of all, you'll have to get a transformer. They're not dual currency.
No, I would also, it's something that you don't really think about. You think, oh, I'm going over to this place, I'll ship my household with me. But really, you might consider not shipping those sorts of things from your household. There's size, electric, getting the thing serviced when you're there. We can always tell who is an expat who shipped their car to Switzerland, for example, because it is so out of place. It's a Chevy Suburban. It takes up 3 parking spots. You can't get it in the garage. It's ridiculous. And it's a waste, right? Because you can't get it serviced. It takes so much more gas, which costs twice as much. For sure, the vehicle you might consider leasing or buying one there, and big appliances definitely don't bring with you. And actually, part of the fun is doing things differently, depending on how long your stay is going to be, right? If you're there for just a couple of years, you might behave differently than if you think, oh, this is my permanent new home. So of course that's going to play a factor, but these are good tips that you're raising. Cars are something that will either make you fit in or stand out. And depending upon what you're trying to do, you really need to consider whether to bring your car with you, if you even can. Like you said, some of them don't have the same permissions. I remember bringing my little Honda Nighthawk motorcycle, one of the most common motorcycles in the world, a CB750. But that particular model hadn't been admitted in Germany. So for 2.5 years, I fought with the German authorities. And at the end of my stay there, I ended up shipping it back and it never was made legal for the road. And it was a frustrating, bitter experience when I should have just left it at home and not tried to bring it with me.
Also, bedrooms are a lot smaller. If you have a super king size bed, that's probably your whole room in most cases, or people open your closets, because most of the European countries that I've been to don't have built-in closets. They have wardrobes. And so that's taking up space too in your room. Depending on how much clothes you have, you might have 2 wardrobes in there somewhere and that have to open up somehow. And so I found that I've never found, I own 2 houses in the United States, but I've never found a master bedroom in all of Europe the same size as my master bedrooms in the United States.
So this gets us to an important point about what I think, in my personal observation, makes for a person who becomes a successful expat, whether it's a 6-month stay or they indeed have adopted France as their new home and they spend the next 20 years there. Same sort of mindset, I think, contributes to whether a person's going to be successful. And it, in my view, has to do with how a person deals with inevitable differences. There's going to be differences in cars, appliances, bedroom sizes, language, food, culture, vacations, absolutely every aspect of daily life, from the important to the mundane, to does this place have air conditioning? Do they use screens? Do the doors close? There's so many little things that you absolutely cannot think of and anticipate. And so the point of that is not to list them all so much as to say, you're going to see a whole bunch of stuff in your new environment that is just different than the one you were coming from previously. No matter how many different places you've lived in, you're going to be surprised by, oh, I guess that's how they do this here. And I encountered people that I think focused on the differences that were worse, and there will be things that are worse, or the ones who focused on the differences that were better. Oh, wow, they have a 2-hour siesta at lunchtime. That's cool. Or, oh, it only costs me $100 to get healthcare, which for a lot of people is a big deal. I know it's not as big a deal for you with your military coverage, but whatever the difference is, if you focus on different but worse or different but better, that's going to shape the whole course of your thoughts about what's your life like in that country. Does that idea of different worse, different better make sense to you? Do you see any validity in the idea?
The reality of my situation, James, is probably even more so than yourself, is because I've moved so much in the military. In the military, I lived in Venice, or near Venice, for 3 years. And I lived in Colombia for 4 years. So I lived in 2 separate countries while I was there. When I was growing up, we talked about this. Other than Iran, multiple places in Holland and Britain, but I didn't have to worry about the family stuff. That's what my parents did. And then I lived in Romania, France, and Spain in the last 5 years. I roll with the punches. Even when I was in the military, not living somewhere for more than a year, I would go for 6 months to all the countries in South America, and then in Kuwait and stuff like that. And I'm very adaptable, and I have very low expectations I don't even have a lot of possessions. Like when we moved to Spain from Romania, here's the other thing that's really interesting about most of these European countries. When you rent, most of them come furnished, which isn't a very common thing in the United States. And in some cases, it's harder to find an unfurnished place. You get what you get as far as furniture, and you can bring some more furniture in if you want. And sometimes you can negotiate, hey, can you take all your furniture with you? Because I'd like to do it. But most of them can't. They don't have a place to store it. Like, it comes with furniture, dude. You either take it or leave it. Like, I lived in 2 different places in Romania, and both of them came furnished, and it wasn't an option. And almost every place I found in Romania was furnished, and and 90% of the places in Spain were furnished. The only good thing about that is that most of these countries are really pro pet. So even though they're furnished, you can still bring your pets with you.
I like the words you're using. You said first you roll with the punches, you're very adaptable, and you have low expectations. Those are good attributes to have. They really are. It is our expectations about things and then seeing those expectations frustrated that causes us to be disappointed. it's really difficult. You've had obviously 30 years of practice having your expectations frustrated to reset your levels to a point where you actually can. It's not a bad thing to have low expectations. What it means is you're going to keep an open mind, see what happens when you get there, and then find a way to adapt to your environment. Those are really useful skills when you are moving to a new country, because take it from us, and we've had experience, you will confront things that are new and different and not what you were expecting. So the point about having few possessions is an interesting one. That, never mind the issue of is my apartment or my house coming furnished or not furnished. That's something that I suspect we probably could do a separate podcast on: possessions, how we fill our life with stuff, and whether that brings us fulfillment or creates obligations. In a very practical sense, it makes it easier to move because you have fewer things to cart around with you, fewer things to worry about getting lost or stolen or damaged. Yeah, that's interesting to me, the impact of possessions on whether your move or how that's going to affect your life in your new place. If you don't have too much, that opens up a separate happy opportunity for some people, which is I can buy things in my new country, and maybe I'll find a cool Spanish carpet or piece of furniture that I like. And it's not about being materialistic necessarily so much as it just opens up opportunities for you to embrace the culture and the environment that you're in a little bit more than you would if you had just bought everything with you from the last place.
I think one of the other things about rolling with the punches is, and we talked a little bit about this, is not everyone appreciates that we're American. I had that, I don't think I've mentioned this on the podcast about the move to France. That was earlier, right? James, did I mention that?
Yes.
So basically I moved to France. The requirements for me to move there, even though I got the visa pretty easily, is I had to find a permanent residence within 3 months, which sounds easy on paper. But in order to get a residence, I had to put a 25-page resume together, because they can just say, I don't want you for no reason. You're like, hey, here's all my financials, here's blah, blah, blah. And then you're selling yourself to them as a rentee. And I got turned down so many times. I could not find a place to live in France within 3 months, because people would just say, are you American? I'm like, yes, I am. And they're like, I don't think you'll meet my requirements. And it was a very to fro conversation. Like, what are those requirements? I might surprise you. No, I don't think you will. I was like, could you tell me what those requirements are? I think I might meet them more than you think. And you're like, no, you're probably not going to meet them. And that was the end of the conversation. It was over. Click. Okay, next. And some of them are more subtle. I found this farmhouse that I really liked in the countryside in France. And the guy's, you're American? I was like, yeah. Do you own a horse? I was like, no, I only rent to people with horses. Why? And that was the end of the conversation. And so it was a lot of angst, and I never found one within 3 months, and I had to leave the country because my visa became invalid. And then I had to get a bank. I had to get a bank in order to rent a house. That was a requirement. And it took me 2 months to get a bank account because I didn't have a permanent address. And it was just, there's all these requirements, which I was anticipating in Spain, but our landlord was very helpful in that. But there's a lot of different rules for the landlords and the people who rent houses. They're very strict. And if you don't have all the requirements before you rent the house, then you can abuse the system. If you know the system, as a person who's renting, you can say, I'm not going to pay rent, and you can't kick me out because the rules are you can't kick me out.
No, and I think some of it is anti-American sentiment, but a great deal of it is just, if you don't know the system, it's just a complexity and a hassle that banks and landlords don't necessarily want to deal with. I saw it when it's good to you highlight both of those factors. Getting a bank account was not easy previously, and in the last 10 years has gotten exponentially more difficult for Americans. This is really something you don't want to underestimate, because there are now reporting requirements for banks that have U.S. customers, and many foreign banks don't like them, and they're burdensome. So there's a lot of banks that's absolutely 100% with no shyness will say, sorry, we don't take American customers, and you're just not eligible. So the few that remain to you in that country will charge you more. They'll make you go through hurdles. The good news is it's pretty clear separation now. The bank will either take you as an American or they won't, and they have a process for taking Americans. Remember Switzerland, the land of banking, you'd think they would be very happy to take new customers, but they made it clear to me they were doing me a gigantic favor, and only because of my company, that they would take me on as a new client. And then I committed the terrible faux pas of trying to start my account with a check. And I'm like, check, what is this? We don't use these. It's going to take 4 weeks to clear. And if don't you have some other way of giving us money? It was eye-opening, really. Yes.
The other thing about renting that I've come up with in Western Europe specifically is the guarantor. I don't know if that's in Switzerland or not, but if it doesn't matter if you're American or not, you need to have someone sign a document saying, if you don't pay your rent, they will pay it for you. And in France specifically is my last experience, but I know in Spain and Portugal, it's prominent too. It's a family member. Hey, who's your closest family member? They need to sign this document saying they're going to pay. Your mom's going to pay if you can't pay. And I'm like, I'm a 54-year-old man. Why do I have to depend on my mom to pay it? And it's not for you. It's for me. I'm the landlord. And if you don't have a person like that living in the country, they have a service for that. It's called the guarantor service. And you send them all the financials of your life, and they decide whether they'll guarantee you because they think you can pay the bill, and they'll sign it for you for 10% of the rent every month for the rest of your time in France. So it's just another thing on top of the rent that you have to pay.
I would say having a problem solving mindset and anticipating, not only having low expectations, but anticipating that you're going to encounter things that are weird and different and difficult is really helpful to have when you contemplate moving to a new country. So there is glamour, there is fun. We haven't talked at all about the upsides of it. And the reason that people do it is, of course, that they like being in a new place. They like learning new languages. They like being exposed to different cultures, foods. That all is real and very much part of the experience. And we should probably end with saying the rewards of being able to navigate this are that you have a rich life with diversity and you get to encounter all of the stuff that people do imagine when they contemplate living in another country. It just comes with some strings attached. That's all. So we're advising you today to pay attention to the strings and to be aware that there are all these strings. They are doable and you can absolutely navigate them. There's more information available online today than there ever has been. You got to do a little bit of work to find the right communities.
And if you don't mind paying for it, there's people that'll walk you through the process. They'll meet you at the airport and they're like, let me show you how it's done. Thank you for your money.
That's a good point, Randy. And we talked earlier about using the relative strengths of your buying power to help ease your way. And that is absolutely a legitimate way to do it. No one says you have to do this by yourself. You're no less valid as a Spanish resident if you've had someone help you figure out how to work through the complexities than someone who got someone to help them.
I would also say they're, like you said, online, but these Facebook groups, they have veterans living in Spain. That's what I'm a member of right now. It talks about my military benefits I can use and any other way to make it easier for me to live. But they have expats from Spain or France or every country under the sun has their own little Facebook page, and they have a lot of documents in there with a lot of free information. You can ask questions in there. Some of them aren't as friendly as other people. I was talking to James before we started the podcast about I moved to Spain, and then I got on expats in Spain. I said, hey, I was wondering what the tax requirements. Does anyone have an accountant I could talk to? I moved to Spain 2 weeks ago, and the first guy to reply was like, kind of late to think about that, huh? And I was like, that's not very helpful. That has nothing to do with the question I asked. I didn't say, can I have a cup of sarcasm today? I said, does anyone have any information about the tax situation for an American living in Spain? Thanks very much, though. But there's a lot of Facebook pages. That's the first place I always go when I'm about to move to a place. I just joined expats in Croatia when I went there for 3 months and just got the kind of lay of the land.
I think that is really good advice. We've moved at different points in our lives. Also, when we were kids, when our families were taking care of it. Sometimes also to be mentioned, your organization will provide you with that assistance with the military or your company. But we assume for most of you listening that this is you contemplating doing it yourself or with your immediate family. And so therefore, you need to be able to look and find these resources. In the legal field, we talk about buyer beware, caveat emptor. It's your responsibility to look into the factors that are going to be relevant to you. So in this case, I guess it would have to be mover beware, caveat movere. Yeah, if you can make it successful, but like a lot of the topics we talk about, a little bit of time spent preparing and thinking about it before you go will behoove you once you're there. And then an open mind once you're on the ground will help you make success. And lastly, your mindset about managing expectations and focusing on what's different but positive. These are all factors that we hope will help you have a successful move. And yeah, I think that's what we wanted to cover today.
I think that's it. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks for listening.
We'd love to hear what you think, so please comment on the show with your thoughts. We read all of your comments.
Thanks for joining us, and thanks for subscribing. See you next time.